And so you're going to find throughout this little mini-series on the Gospel of John these encounters that Jesus has with people. This week, he's got an encounter with a totally different person, a Pharisee by the name of Nicodemus. So the story begins in John 3, and we're going to read a chunk of that. But to start off, there's just these two verses that begin the story. And it says, there was a Pharisee, a man named Nicodemus, who was a member of the Jewish ruling council. He came to Jesus at night and said, Rabbi, we know that you're a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him. So this is only chapter 3, but Jesus' reputation has gotten out for being a miracle worker. We don't know everything that's happened, but we know that Cana happened. We know there was a healing that has happened. And so the rulers of the Pharisees, of the Jews, have gotten wind of this. Now, if you're not familiar with Old Testament kind of history, a Pharisee was the equivalent of our day of a Jewish lawyer, I guess. A Pharisee ruled, or this particular Nicodemus was the member of a group called the Sanhedrin. And that was the Jewish council. They were the governing body in every village, in every town. If you had a dispute as a Jew, you wouldn't take it before the Roman court. You would take it before your own ethnic court. And so Nicodemus sat on this court, and to be on that court, you had to be a Pharisee. And a Pharisee had some pretty strong credentials. They were experts in the law of Moses. In fact, many authors write that to be a Pharisee, you had to have committed to memory the first 5 books, the Torah, first 5 books of the Bible. That would be Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, and Leviticus. Have you ever tried to just read through those 5 books? That's some pretty weighty material, let alone commit it to memory. So a Pharisee knew what he was talking about.
So this is an older guy too. We don't get his age, but by association, if we know he's on the Sanhedrin, then you know he's not a young guy. You don't get on young, you come in older. And just pay attention to just the first 2 verses. He's already making a little bit of a statement about what he thinks about Jesus, but he's couching it in a very particular way. One thing is he's using this word we instead of I. We think this. Have you ever done that? If you're not quite sure about something, some of us have been talking, and a few of us think that maybe possibly. So maybe he is talking about some small group within the Sanhedrin, or he might just be, even softening more what he's saying, trying to edge towards Jesus, to feel this whole situation out. And his statement isn't a strong statement of faith. It is, you're not from God, right? You must be from God because of the stuff that you're doing. And I'm going to give you this label teacher. I'm a judge, and I think I recognize you as a teacher. That's something, right? It's not, we think you ought to be, or you ought to go to jail for what you're doing. So there's a beginning there, but Jesus actually takes him to a completely different place.
Can you remember when you first began, your heart began to stir in the things of God? Something began to happen in your life that you began to consider the claims of Jesus Christ seriously. Something stirs inside of Nicodemus. There's like a breeze blowing, and he can't figure out where it's coming from. So he comes at night, and we'll find out why he comes at night. But Nicodemus will show up again later in the Gospel of John, twice in fact, and he kind of shows up both times in an indirect way to make a statement. In fact, the last time he shows up, he'll come again at night to claim the body of Jesus with Joseph of Arimathea. So he's kind of an interesting character. So he comes with this question or this statement. We know you're a man of God, but behind there is obviously another question, right? And so Jesus sort of leapfrogs over his statement and goes right to the heart of the issue. And he says this, listen, Nicodemus, very truly. When you see that word, we're going to see this phrase 3 times in the passage today, very truly. Jesus is making a point, and in English, this is about as strong as it can get. But Jesus is saying, I am telling you, Nicodemus, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again. Unless they are born again. Now, born again, wow, has that phrase been used over the last 15 or 20 years? In polls and politics and all kinds of things to describe evangelicals to describe people who just simply believe what the Bible says. And I think almost today it has kind of a sour sort of a feel to it. Oh, you're one of those born again people, right? But here's where it all started. Take it up with Jesus. He said, unless you are born again, Nicodemus, I'm sorry, you just can't see it. The word see there is an interesting word that he uses. It means, Nicodemus, it's veiled. There's like a cloud over it. You can't see it because it only comes by revelation. It only comes from outside of you, Nicodemus. It's not something that you don't need new glasses or you don't need a test. Nicodemus, you need a whole new set of eyes. And you don't have the power to pull that off. In a way, Jesus is like locking him into a dilemma right from the get-go.
Revelation is just that, just what it sounds like. I think sometimes we make it a little bit more than it is. It feels so enormous, like, oh, I've got revelation. But revelation is just something that's covered and then it's revealed, right? They do this at car shows all the time. The new model comes out and they put a big drape over it. And it's kind of a mystery, like, oh, what have they changed about, what's new? And then someone just pulls the veil off, and oh, it was right there all along, but we just couldn't see it, but it was covered. And he's trying to do that. There's a veil over the eyes of every Jewish person at this time. Paul actually describes it later in the letters. And he says when they meet Jesus, though, that veil is removed. And they see, and John talks a lot about light in his book, Light and Truth, and they're pretty much the same thing here, light and truth. So something needs to be revealed, and he's trying to kind of, in a way, shake Nicodemus and say, Nicodemus, where you're starting at and where I want to take you, shockingly far apart. Let's go all the way back to birth. That's a hard thing to hear if you're Nicodemus, an old guy who has spent your entire life working towards a goal, that goal being godliness. And every step of that goal just looks like the law and being a diligent keeper of the law. Now, today, when you ask people what is born again mean, the average person will tell you one of two things. One is, a born again believer, that's one of those believers who take a strong moral stance on things. Or they'll say, one of them born again, they're the experiential ones. They've had some kind of a really strong experience, something that's happened, and then, it's some kind of a really emotional thing. But actually, think about it. Neither one of these describe the conversation that Jesus is having with Nicodemus. Nicodemus didn't need another moral law, did he? He didn't need something else. He needed to start all the way over again. And Jesus is going to unpack what that even looks like.
You know what's crazy is none of us have the power to be born. Mm-hmm. I mean, none of us made a decision, hey, I'm going to be born.
It's been about 9 months. I'm out of here.
Yeah. Everything that happened in the natural to you and I had nothing to do with any decision or any will of my own. In other words, with your physical birth, if you could call it this, was a sovereign act. Those circumstances came into play without any input from you or me. Think about this now. In John, later in the gospel, John would record these words that sort of help us understand what's going on right here in John 3. In John 12, it says, even after Jesus had performed so many signs in their presence, now watch carefully here, they still would not believe. This was to fulfill the word of the Lord from Isaiah the prophet. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Revelation, revealed. For this reason they could not believe, because as Isaiah says elsewhere, he has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, so they can neither see with their eyes or understand with their hearts, nor turn, and I would heal them. Isaiah said this because he saw Jesus' glory and spoke about him. Yet at the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him. Maybe he's referring to this Nicodemus. But because of the Pharisees, because of this council, because of their peers, they would not openly acknowledge him, their faith, for fear they would be put out of the synagogue. And he says, John gives us a little insight into what's holding them back. For they loved the praise of men more than the praise that comes from God. You know, the word rebellion, among other things, in most places in the New Testament, It is this: to refuse to give what is owed to somebody. To refuse to give what is owed to somebody. You know, we struggle sometimes with our family of origin because of the pain that we had because of imperfect parenting. But here's a little interesting insight. The Bible is very clear. It says, honor your father and mother, because that's a commandment that carries a promise with it, that it'd go well with us on the earth. And for some of us, we struggle because we look back at our parents and we see, I don't see anything I could be thankful for. Well, listen, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. That's one thing. If you're looking for just one thing to be thankful for, is they brought you into the world. And so we owe them. And now, much more so, we owe God our allegiance. We owe him worship. This is what we do every Sunday morning. Tiffany and our teams call us to this place of worship. Hey, let's recognize his worth, we sang this morning. And rebellion is to simply say, I will not recognize that. I will not be thankful. I will not bow. I will not, right? I was, in the early days, I was part of an event that was evangelism, and we were out in this open air public arena, and we were sharing the gospel with people. And I ran into this one guy. We got to talking, and he had been drinking, and it was obvious. And he was asking me questions and contending with me. And then finally, I just didn't know anything at the time. I was young in the Lord. I said, "You just need to be born again." And man, that just pushed every one of his buttons. I tell you what, this guy just kind of rose up to his full height. He said, "Son, I was born right the first time." And I thought to myself, oh, no, you were not. But that's all I had, so I walked away.
Think about that for a second. The rebellion, giving what is owed or not giving what is owed. I can't help, when I read this week, I'm right here in today, in our political climate, and you're an insider or you're an outsider. This has everything to do with how much you have invested in the system. It has everything to do with it, right? Because Nicodemus was heavily invested in the system, right? He was right up there, and the system had been very, very good to Nicodemus, right? This is, hey, I am a man of privilege. I was born in the right family. I was born at the right time. I did the right things. I went to the right school, and now I have a position. And you are telling me, bam, 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 you want to knock me all the way back to birth? That sounds crazy. So here, I am either going to be in rebellion or I'm going to give you what is due. If you reveal yourself to be Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, I am stuck. I either have to acknowledge this, and it costs me something deeply, or I'm in rebellion to it, and I stay invested in my system. This week and next week is very much about that. I don't want to jump too far into next week, but just know, next week we're going to talk about someone who is outside of the system. And I have to ask myself this question and say, what would it look like in my life to be born again? What does it feel like? How do I even go there? Am I so invested in something that I'm afraid of letting go, or do I see the great value and worth in what Jesus is offering, and I'm willing because I see how valuable it is to do anything to get there? So how is actually the very next question that he has, because, when someone says you need to be born again, and remember, we've all heard this many, many times, but this is the first time anybody's ever said anything crazy like this to Nicodemus. This is all brand new, born again. So he, like we would if we'd heard it for the first time, says, how can someone be born again when they're old? He's still stuck, in this flesh idea of born. And Nicodemus asks, surely they can't enter a second time into their mother's womb and be born, right? I mean, I get you're weird, but you're not that weird, right? And Jesus answered, very truly, I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of water and the Spirit. He's pointing to something else. Like, you're talking about a flesh born again. I'm talking about a spirit born again.
You notice carefully that Jesus doesn't say anything about improving his life. Hey, Nicodemus, you know what you need to do is you need to take this Born Again 101 course that's offered down at the community college, and you're going to get a handle on this. Nicodemus, you need to try harder, pray more, give more, whatever. Jesus mentions nothing about improving his life. He doesn't give him any hope in himself. And for us, that may seem like, that just seems cruel. He should at least recognize that Nicodemus is trying. But Jesus sort of just goes for this absolute no remedy land. He says, Nicodemus, I'm sorry. There's only one remedy for you. What he's trying to do is get Nicodemus in a position to see what he desperately needs. Because sometimes all the trappings of our lives, listen to me carefully, all the achievements in our lives can actually, although they're good things, can hide from us the best thing, the most important thing. Paul would pick up this thread in the book of Ephesians and explain it in much more detail. Listen to this passage. It says, as for you, he's talking to the church in Ephesus, and I think we would be talking to us. He says, we were dead in our transgressions and our sins, in which we used to live when we followed the ways of this world and the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are rebellious, disobedient. And Paul lumps our condition in with all of humanity and says, all of us, everybody, we all lived among them at one time. And what did we do there? We were following an unholy spirit. We were gratifying the cravings of our flesh. We followed its desires and thoughts. That's what we did there. That was our occupation. We followed the cravings of the firstborn man, the one who was born 60 years ago. That's the guy that was running things. And all the world around me of power and position and beauty and wealth and all those kinds of things. That's what we were following, Paul says. Oh, but because of his great love for us, God who is rich in mercy, what did he do? He made us alive even when we were dead. It is by grace you've been saved, he says. It's by grace you've been saved. Something has come alive through no work of my own. It's been this sovereign act of God coming from the outside and bringing life on the inside.
If dead is your problem, then you can't be your solution, right? If dead is your problem, then you can't just fix yourself. If out of shape is your problem, then you can kind of be your solution. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm out of shape. It's a week after Thanksgiving. You know, I should run. I can do that. But if I'm dead, I can't run. I can't do sit-ups. I can't join the gym. I'm dead. I got to have help from somewhere else. And the idea here that Jesus is describing, this isn't the first time this has ever been thought of. As a matter of fact, this carries on with something that God's been saying for a very long time, because dead came from where? Dead came from the garden. Right? Dead came from disobedience. When he said, if you eat of that tree, you will surely die. They ate of it. They didn't immediately die, but something did die. Spiritually, they were no longer alive. They were dead. The relationship that they had, the closeness that they had with God had been broken, and there was no them getting it back. They weren't going to fix this. Matter of fact, they'd spent hundreds and hundreds of years, humanity that is, trying to fix this issue with all kinds of crazy ways, and nothing had ever got them there. And now, it clearly is described in Ezekiel. If you look at Ezekiel 36, Ezekiel, a prophet of God, is trying to describe the problem, not just of one particular time in history, although he lived in a particular time that had a problem, but it was a deeper problem that goes bigger than history, because it's a problem of the human heart. And he says this, he says, I will take you out of the nations. I will gather you from all the countries. I'll bring you back into your land. I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. So, okay, sounds like part of the problem is you're not clean. So I will cleanse you from all your impurities and from all of your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I'll put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. If you have a heart problem and your heart is stone, you can't fix that. You need a heart transplant. You need something alive. You can't make stone alive. Only God can do that. And he's describing something that's coming that only God can do. There's going to be a time, Ezekiel is saying, when our stone tablets that have the law written on them that we try so hard to keep are going to be replaced with the heart of flesh. And he's going to put a spirit in us. And that spirit's going to move us, not out of some sense of, I just need to try harder, but out of love to move towards doing the will of the Lord.
In a way, he's locking him in to this dilemma. He says, Nicodemus, flesh gives birth to flesh, but the Spirit gives birth to the Spirit. You shouldn't be surprised at my saying you must be born again. The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. And so it is with everyone born of the Spirit. Nicodemus says, how can this be? You're Israel's teacher, said Jesus, and you do not understand these things? Very truly I tell you. We speak, who is we? We speak of what we know, and we testify to what we have seen, but still you people do not accept our testimony. I have spoken to you of earthly things, and you do not believe. How then will you believe if I speak of heavenly things? You know, it's interesting, a lot of people refer to this passage as born of water and spirit as, well, you need to be baptized, and then you need to believe. I'm not sure that's what it's saying at all. I think this water thing is what we just read in Ezekiel, that there's a cleansing that comes from outside of us, and this coming alive is the same thing, this birth that comes from outside of us. And what he's saying is, Nicodemus, I'm trying to help you. You're stuck. And I'd love to get you unstuck, but you're stuck in your own strength or lack of. And so Jesus is bringing Nicodemus to the end of himself. And he's trying to get him to see, Nicodemus, if you'll just come to the end of yourself, then there's a wonderful new beginning just waiting for you. But I'll wait till you're done. Isn't it amazing the number of people as pastors over the years, we find people open up to the things of God when they have come to the end of themselves in some way in their lives. My marriage has come to an end. My relationship has come to an end. My health is coming to an end. My finances have come to an end. Could you pray for me? Isn't it amazing how coming to some place of death in your life really awakens something inside of us to go, maybe I don't have the answers. Maybe I'm not enough for this. Listen, and I know, and the crazy thing is in the natural, we're kicking and screaming, we will get to the end of ourselves because we hate to admit failure. We hate, especially North Americans, we hate to face death. But boy, I tell you, when you're in the room with death, man, the spiritual conversations are very near. We were just in the room on Friday with a member of our congregation who lost their mother unexpectedly. And in that room was a dead body. And in that room were a lot of grieving people. And man, it was just a very short jump to talk about the invisible kingdom and the invisible reality of God's kingdom. But boy, when things are flying high and you've got all the accolades and all the money you could ever need, man, it's a difficult thing. It's this weird paradox because what could be a blessing from God actually becomes a hindrance now to knowing Him. And so this coming to the end of yourself is a beautiful thing because it produces something living in us.
You know, in one commentary I was reading on this, they speculated like that it might have been a windy night. Right? It might have been a dark and stormy night and an easy, move towards, you hear that? You hear it, but you don't see it. You don't know where it's coming from. There's something pushing on you, and it's a little bit of a mystery, right? It's just a little bit of a mystery. And there's a sense in which Jesus is moving him towards, this unseen. There's something that I want you to understand, but it's a little bit of a mystery, and the truth is you're not going to see it until you see it. And I know that's frustrating. And here's why I know it's frustrating. Remember those things a few years ago that came out? They were ugly as sin, but they were these 3D posters. Remember those things? And you had to unfocus your eyes to see them just right.
Yeah.
If you're too young, you probably don't even remember what I'm talking about. But they came out
Dollar
in the
store still has
90s
them.
or something. Yeah, they just looked like a mess of static. And then people would look at it and go, oh, it's a ship on the sea. And I'd be like, what? Yeah, you just got to kind of look past it. I'm like, oh, I don't even know what you're talking about. And to this day, I've never seen anything in one of those. But matter of fact, I was almost convinced for a long time there was some sort of conspiracy that everyone was like, you just say you see a monkey. You're like, oh yeah, I see it, it's a monkey. And I'm like, what? But there's a sense in which sometimes this doesn't make sense until it makes sense. Because we can't make it happen in ourselves. Nicodemus has spent a lifetime trying to make it happen in himself. He thinks like, I control the spirit. I move my humanity, my flesh. I can do this thing. I've got the control. I've got the self-control. And Jesus is trying to bust him all the way back down and say, nah, man, you don't understand it. G.K. Chesterton described this. G.K. Chesterton's amazing guy, contemporary of C.S. Lewis. He said, the great human dogma then is that the wind moves the trees. The great human heresy is that the trees move the wind. What he's trying to describe there is we think we have control and that we've got the reins in this thing. But only God is God. And you're either going to recognize that he is Lord and he's in control and submit to that, or you're going to spend a lifetime trying to be good enough. And good luck with that.
And Paul would pick it up again in Ephesians. And God raised us up with Christ. Now watch who is the action here. Look carefully who is the action. And God raised us up with Christ, with him in the heavenly realms, in order that in the coming ages he might show the incomparable riches of his grace, expressed in his kindness to us in Christ Jesus. And Paul's careful to remind us, for it is by grace you've been saved through faith. And even that is not of yourselves. It's a gift of God. Man, that's on the natural man, that's so disappointing because I'm hoping there's something I do, God. Come on, there's got to be something I'm doing that gets me, I'm worth this, right? I earn this, I deserve this. But man, if I'll let go of that and change my position from rebellion to humility, from self-sufficiency to God's sufficiency, from exalting myself to exalting God, from my self-consciousness to God consciousness, I receive this gift so that I can't boast. Jesus would pick it up and say, no man has gone into heaven except the one who came from heaven, the Son of Man. And he says, Nicodemus, so I'll give you a picture here. Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes in him would have eternal life. He refers to this random story, seemingly random, all the way back in Numbers 21, where the people of Israel, what had happened? They'd come through water, led by the Spirit. They'd come through the Red Sea, literal water. He brought them out of 400 years of bondage. They knew nothing except idolatry. They knew nothing about the things of God. 10 generations of godless living. 10 generations of Egypt. He brings them through the water, their baptism. He brings them to the brink of the promised land. He rains quail and manna and all kinds of things down from heaven, and they refuse to acknowledge that he is God. If you want to read this story, it's there in Numbers, but what happens is God himself sends snakes among them. God is angry and he judges them. His wrath falls and these poisonous snakes begin to bite everybody and they start to die. And people are freaking out. I'm not making this up. It's right there in Numbers. And so he says to Moses, quick, get one of those serpents and put it on a pole and lift it up. And everybody who just looks at that thing is going to be healed. Is that crazy? A bronze snake. Hold it up. He's holding up what is cursed. It's the snakes that are killing you. Hold it up. And when everybody looks at that, they're going to be healed. And here, thousands of years before Nicodemus' conversation, Moses in the wilderness paints a picture of someone who will be cursed on a tree, on a pole. And if you will look at him, you'll be healed. And what was killing you now will be flipped for your redemption. Sin, he said, will be broken. The power of sin is broken.
So we know where we're at right here. I mean, we're in John 3:15. We're right before one of the greatest revelations Jesus ever gives about who he is. But before he gets there, he makes sure that he's describing to Nicodemus that it costs something. That this Son of Man, that's an Old Testament phrase that also describes this coming Messiah, that he adopts for himself. He uses it about himself all the time, the Son of Man. But he's also going to say in the very next verse that he's not just this any Son of Man. He's also this greater revelation because he has to be lifted up. And remember, this would cost Nicodemus greatly. So what Nicodemus does is he comes to Jesus at night and he kind of offers him something. And the offer is, I'm a judge. I judge things. It's my job. I'm kind of a big deal around here. And, I judge, in my opinion, that you belong in the system. Some people don't think that you belong in the system, but I think you belong in the system. Matter of fact, I think you're a teacher. I give you that. Right? There's a sense in which I want you to know that I see there is a place for you, and I would like to give a place for you. And instead, Jesus goes, no thanks. As a matter of fact, would you like a place in my kingdom? If you would, you got to be born again. Wait a minute. No, that's not the way this goes. People are excited when I come to them and show them favor. And then he says, now you're going to have to not just acknowledge that I'm a teacher, you're going to have to lift this up. This is going to have to go up. Now again, this is going to cost Nicodemus greatly. And so there's this, what you're saying, I'm losing something in this. Why? Because he hasn't yet seen the revelation of what Jesus is worth. Because when we get what Jesus is worth, then what it costs us doesn't feel like anything at all. So now we're right here, John 3:16. Jesus is going to go farther than he's gone. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because they have not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. This is the verdict. Hey, judge, let me tell you the verdict. Light's come into the world. People love darkness instead of light because their deeds were lawful, were good works, accomplished a lot. No, their deeds, everything that you've been trying to do, your deeds are evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God.
So, light and darkness. As we finish up this morning, I was reading an article this week about, it's interesting how over the last month, the court of public opinion has been full of defendants, right? Who have all been exposed. And every day or every week you look to see who's going to fall next. And I was reading this article, and someone was questioning Harvey Weinstein, who started the whole thing, when he was confronted. And his response was this, as he headed off to rehab: my journey now will be to learn about myself and conquer my demons. I don't judge Mr. Weinstein or pretend to know his motives, but I will tell you right now, Mr. Weinstein, that you're launching out on an impossible endeavor, because no one's going to conquer their demons without someone greater than their demons. That's the gospel in a nutshell. No one is going to conquer their demons without some power that is greater than your demons. Whether that's a demon of sexual abuse or alcohol or addictions or just plain old garden variety human pride. But no one will conquer without some greater power coming into our life. We don't need a renewed life, we need a new life. And this is this both good news and bad news of sides of the gospel. And for the good news to be good news, we have to first of all confront the bad news that I am powerless to save myself. A lot of people have hijacked just that part of it. If you go to AA, that began because a guy had a revelation from a Christian foundation of you have to admit you're powerless over your addictions. And then they sort of sanitized it and took out the Jesus part. But that's where the power lies. And so the same writer, John, in fact, it's interesting, if you read the polls that have been around over the last 5 to 7 to 8 years, you'll hear a lot about a guy named Barna who is very good at statistics and taking polls. And in those polls, they talk about things like born-again Christians. Well, born-again Christians say this and this and that. Let me read you a passage. Born-again Christians, in a report that was titled that, are just as likely to divorce as non-Christians. Another author uses the word evangelicals, but points out the same kind of thing. Only 9% of born-again Christians tithe or give anything of their resources away. Of 12,000 born-again teenagers who took the pledge to wait for marriage, 80% reneged on that pledge and had sex before marriage. 26% of born-again believers don't think that sex outside of marriage is wrong. White born-again Christians are more likely than Catholics and mainline Protestants to object to having black neighbors. So you look at that poll and you're kind of like, wow, are we a messed up bunch of people? So is born again a label to describe me or an experience that actually defines me? I take issue with Mr. Barna because I think he was using a term unfairly. I think he was talking to people who said they were born again that in fact were not born again, and he was putting it in his polls. That's a sobering thought. I think he was talking to people who were putting the blank as, I'm born again, but everything in their lives seemed to point to something else. Now, as we finish up this morning, John, the writer of John, would come later in an epistle after the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. And he would just describe in a very gentle way this act of being born and then this process, this act of being born and then this process of becoming. I want you to go away this morning with those two words clear. There is an act of being born, and then there is a process of becoming. I don't know about you, but in the raising of children, their birth was an amazing act. It was a miraculous thing that I wept as I witnessed it. But the raising of my children was far more complicated, far more tedious. There was a lot of tension and struggle as we tried to raise them and train them to be men and men of God and men of character. And John would refer to this. He would refer to it in 1 John 2. If you know that he is righteous, you may be sure that everyone who practices righteousness has been born of him. Hear the word there? Practices. There's a mark of someone who has had a new birth. They're practicing. 1 John 3:9, no one born of God makes a practice of sinning. For God's seed abides in him, this eternal seed. And he cannot keep on sinning because he's been born of God.
There's a mark of new believers too. There's something that, like when you come under new management, if you're a restaurant and you're failing and you come under new management, I come in. I've been there before, but I've come in, I see the sign under new management. I expect it to be a little bit cleaner, a little bit, there's something else happening. John describes it in 1 John 4:7. He says, beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. It's just this mark. It's just a thing. Now, I can just say, oh, okay, to be born again, I need to love. No, that's backwards. You can't make that happen, right? If I've got a little apple tree in my backyard, they taste terrible. I've decided I'd rather have a peach tree. How smart would I be to go out there and start fertilizing that and doing a better job of trimming it and taking care of it, thinking, okay, next year I want peaches. It's not going to work, is it? I've got to uproot it and plant something else. If this has been planted, then indeed, love is going to be one of the fruit that comes from this.
1 John 5:4 says, everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that overcomes the world, our faith. So what he's describing here is this ever-increasing ability to live in relationship with the God who brought you into the world, with the God who brought you into the kingdom. It's kind of like being in the batting cages. You ever gone to a batting cage, right? Your first time in the cage, the balls are just like coming at you. You're just trying to figure it out. And you may miss the first 10, but you stay in there, and sooner or later, your hand and eye are going to begin to gather something, and you're going to hit one. And then you're going to miss 9 more, and you're going to hit another one. And you're going to miss 6 more, and you're going to hit another one. You stay in the cage, and you're going to get better. You're going to practice. You're practicing loving. You're practicing righteousness. And God gives us all these environments to practice in. One of them is called marriage. Hey, you had a hard time. I think you're struggling with loving. Let me help you out. I'm going to give you someone to live with you. Oh, you know what? You say you're the most humble and patient person in the world. I'm going to have you join a church. And then I want you to serve there. Practice that. Practice being around. It's easy to say you love people if you just stay away from them.
I love the concept of people.
I love the concept of people, yeah.
1 John 5:18, we know that everyone who has been born of God does not keep on sinning. That can land on you like a condemnation, or it could be a word from a father. But he who was born of God protects him. See, it's a father saying it to you. He's like, actually, you're not in this alone. I'm here to protect you. And the evil one does not touch him.
As we go to communion, think about the big picture with us, which is we finish. Some of us in here this morning are struggling with even what we're hearing. And a lot of that struggle, for some the struggle may be rooted in rebellion. But for some the struggle may be rooted in identity. And what God is saying here, listen, if you've come into my kingdom, you're my son or my daughter, and I've given you the power to become that son or daughter. But your old life, your old man condemns you and accuses you to me. And I don't accuse you. I'm with you. But you've got to start practicing whose voice you're going to listen to. So as we go to the communion, it's an open communion. If you're a believer and a follower of Jesus, you're more than welcome to partake with us. As you go, you're moving towards these things that represent redemption, represent payment that you and I had nothing to do with. As you hold them, we'll serve. We'll wait till everyone's served, and then we'll take together.